rabbinic and the Jewish history within regards to the country Gibraltar. A special edition today. We've been exploring about the rabbinic and the Jewish life of various different countries already here in this series, and today we think we will be inspired by learning a bit about the Jews of Gibraltar and a bit of the history within regards to the community in of itself. Now, it dates back all the way to the 14th century, and despite, let's just say, period, for the most part, the Jewish community of Gibraltar have prospered and been one of the largest, let's say, religious minorities in the city, and have made huge, let's just say, contributions, especially to defense, culture, and the government, as we're going to see. Now, I think significantly, the Jewish community of Gibraltar have faced, let's say, especially compared to most of the countries that we're speaking about, no real official anti-Semitism during their time in the city. During Gibraltar's Centenary celebration, the chief rabbi of the Commonwealth countries, Jonathan Sacks of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and North, he was quoted as saying, "In the dark times of expulsion and inquisition, lit the beacon of tolerance." That's what he quoted about it. A very, very, let's say, great compliment within regards to that. And that Gibraltar is probably the community where Jews have been the most integrated. That's very interesting enough. Okay, let's explore a lot of history. We're going to speak about the synagogues with regards to rabbis, the key figures. We're not going to be able to cover everybody that potentially we could do, but we will have at least a taste, let's just say, in itself. Now, I think the first record of Jews that actually in Gibraltar actually comes from the year 1356, when they were under Muslim rule at that point in time, when the community issued an appeal asking for the ransom of a group of Jews taken captive, I believe at that point in time, by Barbary pirates. In 1474, 12 years after the Christian takeover, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, I think, sold Gibraltar to a group of Jewish conversos from Cordoba and Seville, led by, at that point in time, Pedro de Herrera, in exchange for maintaining the garrison of the town for 2 years, after which time the 4,350 Jews were expelled by the Duke. Their fate, I don't think, was known necessarily. And there's various different thoughts that have been come about, that many returned to Cordoba, where they had to face the persecution, unfortunately, of the Inquisition under infamous Torquemada from 1488. And now, I think the Jews were, expelled, obviously, from Spain under the period of 1492, and also from Portugal, from King Emmanuel I in 1497. Effectively, it ended, let's just say, all Jewish activity there, except in cases of the conversos or, let's say, or possible crypto Jews in of itself. Come with the 18th century, much of the rations of the British military forces, let's just say at that point in time, was non-kosher foods like beef and pork, and barrels of salted meat were provided by England and Ireland. However, in order to avoid the scurvy, fresh provinces had to be procured for soldiers after, let's say, a few months of salted or cured food. For soldiers stationed in Gibraltar, Morocco was the most convenient location to obtain fresh beef. Although pork obviously was not available for the Muslim country, subsequently starting in the early 18th century, after the 1704 capture of Gibraltar, Jewish merchants from Tetuan in Morocco were encouraged, let's say, at that point in time, to come to Gibraltar with provisions. Very interesting enough. Now, I think British rule will come in the year 1705, and Jews met in private houses or in a warehouse in what is now, let's say, the Bomb House Lane, respectively. Some consider that warehouse on what was, let's say, known as La Quille va à la Plus de Juan Serrano. It's Gibraltar's first synagogue founded under British rule. After the Treaty of Utrecht, I believe in the year 1713, Gibraltar then came under the rule of the Kingdom of Great Britain, which made the area of British dependency. Let's say Spain insisted on language in the treaty that excluded Jews and Moors from Gibraltar at that point in time. I think, let's say, Jews, we know that Jews had been expelled, obviously, from England in 1290. We spoke about that, I think, on a special Tisha B'Av video we did, I think about a year ago, when we were speaking about Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel. This was, I think, in 1290. Eventually, in 1655, Oliver Cromwell had consented to their readmission. thanks to the efforts also of Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel. The admission of Jews was one of the infractions against the Treaty of Utrecht, and the Spanish used to consider that the British had abrogated the treaty. Attempts, let's say, to have the clause deleted were unsuccessful. It was around the year 1716. Supplies began to arrive over the border with Spain, but the Spanish ambassador at the time complained that there were substantial numbers of Jews living in Gibraltar in violation of the terms of the treaty. Now, the British government insisted that Lieutenant Governor of Gibraltar adhere to the terms of the 1713 treaty, and Jews, I think, were expelled from Gibraltar, unfortunately, in 1717. But under the terms of the Treaty of Utrecht, Spain lost Sardinia and Sicily at that point in time. And I think at that point, despite that, in 1717, the same year as the expulsion of Jews from Gibraltar, Spain dispatched an expedition to recover Sardinia and Sicily. European countries, finally having peace after the War of the Spanish Succession, responded to Spain's actions by declaring war. Provisions no longer came across the border with Spain. Accordingly, Jews were again allowed into Gibraltar so that supplies from Morocco would resume. Come what 1721, let's say a reciprocal treaty was negotiated with the Sultan of Morocco, Ismail ibn Sharif, allowing both Jews and Muslims to settle in Gibraltar and Englishmen to reside in Barbary in Morocco, respectively, at that point in time. And that's very, very interesting. So in 1729, I think the British and the Sultan reached an agreement whereby the Sultan's Jewish subjects were legally permitted to reside in the colony. Subsequent treaties with Morocco limited the stay of Jews and Muslims to 3 months. However, this was ignored by the governors of Gibraltar. Jews were given the right to permanent settlement in 1749, when I think Rabbi Isaac Nieto, who was the new community's first rabbi, came to the colony from London and established the congregation Sha'ar HaShemayim, the oldest synagogue in Gibraltar, otherwise known as a Great Synagogue. At that date, there were already 600 Jews in Gibraltar, who constituted 1/3, or let's just say, of the civilian inhabitants there at that point in time. In 1777, 863 Jews lived in Gibraltar, 3/4 of whom were natives of the country. The Jewish population in Gibraltar in 19th century, around 1805, represents half the population. 1878, there were 1,533 Jews residing already in Gibraltar at that point in time. Now, there was already one great synagogue in Gibraltar, and then 3 more synagogues were built, which we're going to speak about in due course. There was the Nefusot Yehuda synagogue, the Little Synagogue, which was built in 1781, as well as that famous Abu Dharam synagogue, I think in 1820, which is actually named after the great Rabbi Solomon Abu Dharam, who we're going to speak about in due course. The Jewish population continued to grow. I believe it reached a peak in the mid-19th century. Now, the Jews of Gibraltar, let's say, preserved various old customs. I think in 1777, famous Isaac Aboab, he was a Gibraltarian Jew in Tetuan, was listed as, at that point in time, I believe he had 2 wives. It's reported, remember, there was a takana, for Ashkenazi communities of Rabbeinu Gershon, where they can only have 1 wife, but I think mostly in the Sephardic countries, by and large, for many, many years, they wouldn't keep to this takana, and they would be allowed 2 wives at that point in time. So, for example, Isaac Aboab was listed as having 2 wives, for example. Also, what's interesting is their names were Hannah Aboab and Sima Aboab. And bigamy was illegal in the Kingdom of Great Britain at that point in time, but law was apparently not fully operative in Gibraltar. And though, let's say, polygamy had been banned by Rabbeinu Gershom or Hagolah, which is spoken about before, since approximately, I think, 1000 CE Common Era, this ban was only accepted by Ashkenazi communities at that point in time. Now, I think come what the 20th century, someone named Mr. Benedy, he was a famous historian of Gibraltar Jewry, noted that I think noted various different happenings at that point in time, especially during the Second World War. I think they found the Jewish cemetery of Funchal, if I'm not mistaken, and many other happenings. I think On the 28th of May 1944, the first repatriation party departed Madeira for Gibraltar, and by the end of 1944, only 520 non-priority evacuees remained on the island at that point in time. Yeah, I think there was a monument was made in Gibraltar, I think in 2008, that shipped to Madeira, where it had been erected next to a small chapel at the Santa Catarina Park, Funchal. There was a monument, I think, which was a gift and symbol of everlasting thanks given to people of Gibraltar, to the island of Madeira and its inhabitants. We're talking about here that with regards to what happened, with regards to 200 Jews or 2,000 evacuees from Gibraltar were evacuated as non-combatants, I think, during the Second World War, to Funchal, Madeira at that point in time. I think they've actually found a Jewish cemetery over there, which had actually belonged to the Abu Dharam family. Obviously, the same family after whom the Abu Dharam synagogue in Gibraltar, let's say, was named, which is very, very interesting. Okay, so I think there was various different mayors. I think, for example, in 2009, the mayor of Funchal, Miguel Alboca, and the mayor of Gibraltar had been an evacuee from Gibraltar to Madeira. I think Solomon Levy, respectively. The mayor of Gibraltar would have meeting with various presidents of Madeira, so there was a strong connection with them. Most of Gibraltar's Jews, let's say, were evacuated to the United Kingdom during the Second World War, with, let's say, the Allies used Gibraltar as a base of operation. Some Jews opted to stay in the United Kingdom, but most returned. Although there was, let's say, a slackening in some of their religious practices, the efforts of Spanish, Sephardic, Italian-born Rabbi Joseph Pacifici, Rabbi we've spoken about on the series before, would assume the Gibraltar rabbinate and took control of Jewish education in Gibraltar. That, let's say, had helped reverse the tendency of, like, let's say, going away from the strict levels of observance that was before. Come on, 1984, Rabbi Ron Hasid would become the chief rabbi. And we're going to speak about Rabbi Ron Hasid as we progress this video also. Now, it's actually interesting over here. I believe there was several Gibraltarian Jews at that point in time had served important positions in the government, I think, in the 20th century. I think there was for example, there was a famous person named Sir Joshua Hassan would serve as a chief military of Gibraltar for 2 separate terms. There was also someone of the name Solomon Levy would, I think, serve in the ceremonial role of Mayor of Gibraltar from 2008 to 2009. And at this point in time, we're talking about the current history of Gibraltar. I think there would be about, and currently there's about 5 kosher institutions in Gibraltar, respectively, at this specific window in time. Also, at the moment, very interesting in Gibraltar, there happens to be, I think, a Jewish primary school also, which is very, very interesting in Gibraltar. So we're talking about now the current time period. There's 5 kosher institutions in Gibraltar. There's a Jewish primary school and 2 secondary schools also. Come on, 2004, I think there was a celebration of 300 years since the British takeover. The congregants of the Great Synagogue at that point in time, also popularly known as Shara Shamayim, performed the anthem of God Save the Queen in Hebrew. The first time that had occurred officially. Very interesting enough. This is another tidbit of what's happened also. Very interesting. It's actually so we've talked about it. It's actually interesting when we're talking, going back to the second, many of the people evacuating camps in Jamaica at that point in time, where I think the diets were sometimes less than optimal, and there were misunderstandings with Jews who were sent there as refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe. Some never would return to Gibraltar, I think, respectively, after the cessation of hostilities. I think we could say more in addition with regards to what happened at that point in time. And just hold on 1 minute. I'm just... Yeah, thanks everyone for being patient. I just took a short break over here. We're talking about the history over here of Gibraltarian Jewry, what actually has occurred over the years. And we're talking about, especially during the evacuation in the Second World War time period, we said that many of the population, Gibraltarian Jewish population, would even end up in Jamaica, I believe it's reported, over at that stage of time, where I think there was problems maybe with dieting, let's just say, for the Jewish community over there. And I think many people will also be refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe. They would go to Gibraltar. So many of the people would not return to Gibraltar after the cessation of hostilities. I think in 1967, someone named Francisco Franco closed the border with Spain after there was a referendum in which Gibraltar's residents expressed their desire to remain British. The border didn't completely reopen until 1985. The population will then go on to dwindle during the 20th century. However, the Jewish population would start growing again, and now numbers about 750, approximately 2% of Gibraltar's residents. And I think the years between 2000 and 2011, it was remarkable for nearly a 25% in the size of Gibraltar's Jewish community. Mark Benedict, a vice president of Gibraltar's Jewish community, is of the opinion that the area's infrastructure, including its 4 synagogues, could support a community of 2,000 people, which is absolutely staggering, which you have to point out over here. Okay, more can be said. I think it's interesting. Another interesting tidbit about Gibraltar is on the Gibraltar tourist map of the city centre, each synagogue is indicated by a Star of David, a picture of it. I think the chief rabbi of Gibraltar is Rabbi Ron Hasid, as mentioned before, who actually presides over all the 4 synagogues over there. And I think another rabbi in 2010, Rabbi Raphael Bitan, was actually from Manchester, a rabbinical judge, serves as headmaster of the Jewish community schools over there. And as we said before, the Sir Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in 2004, spoke at a service in the Great Synagogue, which commemorated the 300th anniversary of the victory of Anglo-Dutch fleet at Gibraltar. The occasion also served as a celebration of Gibraltar as a haven for Jews, as we said before. The famous God Save the Queen sung in Hebrew. So that's very interesting. I think in 2010, the Gibraltar Jewish community organised a celebration, the 95th anniversary of the founding of their organisation. Now, demographics, as we've spoken about before, I think the Jewish population of Gibraltar was 575 out of 1,800 inhabitants, I think, in the first census that was actually made. Come on, 1830, I think 1,300 native Jews were over there, if I'm not mistaken. In 2001, there were 584 Jews. And that was about 2% of the total population, and it's actually interesting. So the vast majority of Gibraltar's Jews are Sephardic, but there are some British Jews as well we have to speak about. What are the languages that's used by the Gibraltar community? They include English, Spanish, and also Ladino. And obviously that's spoken by the population. Also, some people would speak Arabic, which is obviously traditionally spoken by the population, which obviously will trace themselves back to Morocco. It's another language, Lilanito, which is a vernacular language for the majority of Gibraltarians, has significant Jewish influence. I think some 500 words are of Hebrew origin. And language also features, let's say, of influence from Hakiatia. This happens to be a Judeo-Spanish language spoken by the Sephardic communities of northern Morocco and the Spanish exclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, which is also very interesting enough. Now, there's 4 synagogues in Gibraltar, 4 famous ones, also known as the Great Synagogue, the Abu Daran Synagogue, the Little Synagogue, and the Nefusat Yehuda Synagogue. Very famous enough. So let's speak a bit about the 4 different synagogues over here. The history. The Great Synagogue of Gibraltar. It's also known as the Kahal Kadosh Sha'ar HaShamayim. This synagogue is a holy congregation, gate of heaven. It's got another name in Ladino. Obviously, Orthodox synagogue. It's located in the British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar. It was the first synagogue on the Iberian, let's say, peninsula to operate following the Jewish expulsions from Spain and Portugal in 1492. It was completed actually in the 1720s. It's the oldest synagogue in continuous use in Gibraltar, and it's Gibraltar's principal synagogue over here. Yes, let's speak about it. I think in 1724, Rabbi Isaac Nieto from London, he was the first rabbi to lead the congregation over there, and we're going to speak about Rabbi Nieto towards the end of this class. He was one of the Jewish merchants who settled in Gibraltar in the early 18th century. Now, I think during the 1727 siege of Gibraltar, he was Gibraltar's sole importer of food supplies from Morocco. Following the death of his father in 1782, Rabbi Nieto returned to London, where in 1732 he would be appointed the chief rabbi of Bevis Marks. Now, it's actually interesting, he was close to another man he was working with. James Argot would become the beneficiary of his decision to leave Gibraltar. And that was a monopoly of Moroccan food imports was transferred to him. The synagogue was inaugurated in 1724 on a plot of land granted by the Jews by the then governor of Gibraltar, Richard Kane. Having been rebuilt several times, the present building largely dates from 1812, completed in the Regency style, and shares features in common with the parent Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, that's in 1675, and Bevis Marks in 1701 over there. Now, the synagogue, I think, was inaugurated, as I said before, obviously in 1724. Now, the entrance to the original building was on a synagogue lane. Also, now it's called the Serafati's Passage. Now, the family name Serafati obviously has a lot of Gibraltar. There's a lot of people, I think, Gibraltarian Jews with the family name Serafati nowadays. Now, following there was a destruction in the storm of 30th December 1766. A larger synagogue was rebuilt at the same site in 1768, but now with an entrance to Engineer Lane. The second building was also destroyed during attacks by the Spanish on 17th of May 1781, and the third building was constructed after the conclusion of the Great Siege of Gibraltar. So that's very interesting. I think there was also a slight damage by fire in 1812, and it would need a partial rebuilding of the synagogue after that in of itself. Now, another synagogue over there, the famous Abu Dharam synagogue. What's that? Obviously, it's once again, they're Orthodox synagogues over here. It's located on Parliament Lane in Gibraltar, obviously a British overseas territory of the United Kingdom. Now, it was in the year 1804. Rabbi Solomon Abu Dharam died. I think there was in a yellow fever epidemic. The following year, in 1805, Jews represented half of Gibraltar's population. 1820, the Academy of Rabbi Solomon Abu Dharam on Parliament Lane was converted into a synagogue by those congregants of the Great Synagogue who were recent immigrants from Morocco and wanted a smaller, more informal setting. Earlier, the building had served as a free Masons' Hall. Accordingly, Parliament Lane is still referred to as a Caléjon de los Maçons. The Abu Dharam synagogue is a small place. It's a smaller place, let's say, of a synagogue. Wooden pew. Let's say it's made from wooden pews that face a bima. Let's say it's elevated to form on the Torah, as is read over there, respectively. More can be said with regards to the Abu Dharam synagogue. Actually, is the fourth and most recent of the active synagogues to be established in Gibraltar. Now, another synagogue over there is called the Little Synagogue, which is also known as Etz Chaim Synagogue. I think it was actually it's located in an Irish town in Gibraltar, and the synagogue was established all the way back in 1759. It's actually interesting. The Gibraltar itself has two sets of synagogue customs, Spanish and Portuguese, which were accustomed to the formality of, let's say, and that's there. Those services tend to be more formal. However, in Morocco, Jews, I think, were prohibited to building places of worship under Sharia law. Subsequently, they were accustomed to meeting in makeshift groups in their own homes and continue to do so in Gibraltar. They dislike the formal services, let's say, of the Great Synagogue, which they refer to as the Dutch Synagogue. In 1759, the yeshiva, a Talmudic academy, which had been established by Rabbi Isaac Nieto, was converted into the Little Synagogue for the use of Moroccan Jews. Its official name, Etz Chaim, after the Talmudic Academy in Amsterdam, but is more commonly known as the Little Synagogue. It is believed to have been destroyed during the Great Siege of Gibraltar and later rebuilt over there. Now, it's interesting. The synagogue, I think, was renovated in 1921. In 1749, the Jewish population of the island was 600 people. It would grow and peak around 1,500 in the 1870s. The number of Jews decreased during the Second World War, as many were evacuated from the island and never returned. And that's very interesting. Historically, the Jewish cemetery on the island was a Jewish gate cemetery on Windmill Hill, used, I think, between 1746 to 1848. And I think currently the cemetery is located on Devil's Tower Road, to report over. Now, the last synagogue we're speaking about here is the famous Nefusot Yehuda synagogue. Also, officially, the Kahal Kadosh Nefusot Yehuda. known as the Flemish synagogue, also known as the Lime Wall Synagogue by other places, located on Line Wall Road in Gibraltar, over here. Now, what about this? I think it's existed since early 18th century, this synagogue has. And the new synagogue came about because many thought that the Moroccan traditions had begun to dominate the services at the Great Synagogue. Subsequently, members of the congregation chose to establish a new synagogue that would adhere to the formal Dutch synagogue, the Dutch and London customs, under which the Great Synagogue was founded. The late 18th century was a time of prosperity in Gibraltar. Subsequently, new congregants were able to afford 26,300, about £3,000, cost of Gibraltar's next synagogue on the garden bought by Semtop, also known as Toby Secura. I think he was born in 1784 in London. The synagogue was built from 1799 to 1800 by Dutch merchants. That I think it was originally modelled after the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, interesting enough. It was entitled the Sot Judah, let's just say in English, the Dispersed of Judah, and opened in 1799 to 1800, also known as the Flemish synagogue respectively, over there. They went to maintain various Dutch traditions, especially when it came to marriage contracts, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And the members of the Flemish synagogue utilized sheets from a book which numbered pages for the marriage contracts rather than the hand-illuminated parchment documents that were customary in Gibraltar. From its foundation until 1882, the ministry of the synagogue was a member of the Concu family, and I think they came to Gibraltar from Amsterdam in the 18th century, but were originally from the Spanish city of Cuenca, I think respectively. Now, the interior of this building was destroyed by fire in 1913. An architect who was responsible for its reconstruction was an Italian who was, let's just say, more familiar with the architecture of maybe churches, it's reported over there. Now, more interesting facts with regards to the Jewish community now of Gibraltar. Let's just talk about it. We know that in Spain, we've spoken about it, when Spain officially handed Gibraltar over to the British, they included an important condition. One of their condition was no Jews were allowed. This was a holdover from Spain's 1492 expulsion of the Jews. But practical needs got in the way, and Britain depended on nearby Morocco supplies, and Jewish merchants from Morocco played an important role. This is what we spoke about 15 minutes ago. So the British relaxed the rules and allowed Jewish settlers to establish themselves on the peninsula. Another interesting fact about Gibraltar is there was a supporting structure with the Moroccan Jewish community, especially at the time when they had become part of British territory. The Jews of Gibraltar, they kept their roots the whole time, and especially during the 1800s, there was they showed generosity to Jewish communities in Morocco. They sent a lot of financial assistance to the communities in Morocco, the Gibraltarians did, and helped to fund different Beit Medrashas, synagogues, and Torah study places, respectively. What's interesting, the Gibraltarian community, they fused three different cultures. Moroccan heritage, obviously Spanish surroundings, Spanish heritage, and British customs also. So it blends in the customs of language, food, so on and so forth, and which is actually very, very interesting. There were more great rabbis who we're going to speak about in due course. We're going to speak about the rabbis in a few minutes. Obviously, Rabbi Shlomo Abu Daram, one of the earlier rabbis, Rabbi Nieto, who we spoke about, or Rabbi Raphael Ibn Naim, also another rabbi from Tetuan we're going to speak about. He was a famous rabbi there. And Rabbi Yosef El Malach, who was a chief rabbi of Gibraltar in the early 19th century. He was another one. I think a famous story, we can say, with regards to Rabbi Yosef El Malach. He was a famous rabbi early 19th century. I think late one night, he went to a synagogue to pray without realizing, I think at that point in time in Gibraltar there was a curfew, when a soldier aimed his weapon at him. The soldier's hand froze in place until Rabbi El Malach prayed for his recovery. Interesting enough. So that's a famous story within regards to another great rabbi of Gibraltar, Rabbi Yosef El Malach, which we have to point out. Now, we know some of the famous Jewish people that serve leadership roles in Gibraltar. There's a huge long list. I think 3 mayors in the past century have served as mayors of Gibraltar. Joshua Hassan, we're going to speak about, Abraham Serafati, and Solomon Levy. We're going to speak about them in some detail recently. And more recent rabbi from Gibraltar, who would really mitzchazek the community after the Second World War, was a rabbi known, as this was in the 1950s and 1960s, Rabbi Yosef Emanuel Pacifici. He was an Italian-born rabbi, helped, let's say, Mark mitzchazek the community spiritually, a spiritual revival. And he actually had encouragement, I believe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe at that point in time, and he had correspondence with him. And he really worked tirelessly to strengthen religious observance and bolster youth education at that point in time. So that is very, very interesting. Gibraltar has its own dialect, as we spoke about 10 minutes ago. Obviously, we mentioned Latino, which is a Spanish mixed with English and words from other languages. Obviously, with Jewish presence over the strong one in territory, many loaned out words are from Jewish origin. For example, such as ma'ot, money, haham, know-it-all, betzim, eggs. Many Latino words, I think, come from the Heketia, an old Judeo-Spanish dialect, once widely spoken by the Jews of North Morocco. Now, the language, along with its Jewish flavour, I think, has become more in decline in recent times, I have to point out. Now, the beauty about the Gibraltarian community, they trace their ancestry back many centuries of the very beginning years of Jewish life in Peninsula, and even earlier. I think it's common for new couples to include their family lineage on their ketubah, also reminding them of their unique heritage and their responsibility as the next link in the golden chain of Gibraltarian Jewry, which is very, very interesting. Let's speak about some of the famous rabbis over here of Gibraltaria. Now, first one we're going to speak about is Rabbi Solomon Abu Daram. He was a chief rabbi of British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar. We mentioned before that he passed away from I think there was a yellow fever at that point in time. He established a school of religious study on Parliament Lane, an inaugural stone for the Flemish synagogue, and his academy was converted, obviously, to the Abu Daram synagogue, also respectively. Let's explore a bit with regard to him, respectively. He was the chief rabbi, and I think his predecessor will be Chief Rabbi Yehuda ben Yitzchak Halevi, who we'll maybe speak about also in due course. Now, Rabbi Solomon Abu Daram was known as Shlomo Abu Daram II. He was a grandson of Shlomo Abu Daram I. He happened to have been from Tetuan in Morocco. It's also probable that he's a descendant of the Spanish Rabbi David Abu Daram, or the author of the Sefer Abu Daram, respectively. We spoke about him in this series. The younger Abu Daram immigrated to the British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar from Morocco in 1790, and that prompted by, let's say, the reign of terror, which began when the Muslim Mawlai al-Yazid became Sultan of Morocco following the death of Sidi Muhammad ben Abdallah that year. Now, Rabbi Abu Daram succeeded Rabbi Yehuda ben Yitzchak Halevi as a chief rabbi of Gibraltar, which is very, very interesting. I think the late 18th century was a time of prosperity, especially for Gibraltar's merchants, due to there was a French Revolutionary Wars at that point in time. Some of the congregants of the Great Synagogue on that place had reservations about the trend of a less formal, more Moroccan-style service at their house of worship, and they opted to build a new lavish synagogue on Line Wall Road with a service that would be more in keep with the Portuguese synagogue of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The new synagogue was built. I think there was a little point at that point in time. Chief Rabbi Abu Daram laid the inaugural stone, which bears his name and is present at the site today. He established a midrash over there, and the Academy of Rabbi Solomon Abu Daram on Parliament Lane over there also. Now, I think he sadly passed away in 1804. There was a yellow fever epidemic, which I think sadly claimed more than 1,000 lives in Gibraltar. He was interred in the Jews' Gate Cemetery on the Windmill Hill near the southern entrance to the Upper Rock Nature Reserve, and his grave, let's say, rests in an enclosure, let's say, which also surrounds the tombs of other great Dayanim, Jewish judges of religious law. His tomb is the oldest of the 6 Dayanim in the enclosure over there, which I have to point out. And at that point in time, Morocco, you can say there's a huge amount that you can say within regards to the famous Abu Daram synagogue over there. Its time, a lot of heritage with regards to it, and so on and so forth. Now, another famous rabbi of Gibraltar was, let's just say, a great Zionistic rabbi, a man of the name, Rabbi Dr. Yehuda Bibas, or to give him his full title, Rabbi Dr. Yehuda Ariel Leon Bibas. He was, I think, born in 1789 and passed away in 1852. He was not just a great Sephardic rabbi, he was known as one of the most prominent forerunners of the modern Zionist movement. He also would serve not just rabbi in Gibraltar, he was a chief rabbi of Corfu, of Greece, also we had to point out. He was born in 1789. He was actually born in Gibraltar, and he would pass away in Hebron in 1852. He was part of Ottoman Syria at that point in time. And he passed away on the 17th of Nisan. We recorded a video about him at the time period of his Hilula, and he was buried in the old cemetery of Hebron. Let's speak about him for a minute. Obviously, being born in Gibraltar, I think he was from a family that were expelled from Spain and would settle in North Africa. His father came from a line of rabbis in Tetuan that immigrated to Gibraltar. I think there was a pogrom. One of his maternal ancestors was the famous Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar. As a child, Rabbi Bibas studied in Gibraltar. Following his father's death, he moved to Livorno in Italy to live with his grandfather, and so that's quite interesting. In Livorno, at that point in time, had a great Jewish community. Rabbi Bibas received in Livorno most of his Jewish and secular education, becoming especially fluent in English, Italian, Spanish, and Hebrew. He became a rabbi and a trained physician also, while in Italy, and would later return to Gibraltar and establish himself as head of a cult yeshiva. His yeshiva was attended by students from England, Italy, and North Africa. I think in 1810, he would actually eventually come to London, England, where he was met by the famous Jewish activist and philanthropist, Sir Moses Montefiore, who would help fund Rabbi Bibas's activism. I think in 1831, Rabbi Bibas was appointed as the chief rabbi of Corfu, of Greece, respectively. Zionism activism, he was very involved with. 1839 to 1840, Rabbi Bibas visited many Jewish communities, particularly those of Europe, inspired by Serbian and Greek revolts against Ottoman Turks. Rabbi Bibas began advocating a mass repatriation of Jews to Israel. Obviously, it was part of Ottoman Empire then. In the same year, he would meet with the famous Rabbi Yehuda Alkali, who was also another one of the forerunners of Zionism, you could say, from Serbia, respectively, and he would become Rabbi Alkali's mentor. Rabbi Alkali would go on to become one of the most, let's say, influential proto-Zionists himself. Remember, we mentioned about Rabbi Alkali. He was very close with the famous Theodor Herzl's grandfather, who was, I think, a chavruta of his, and prayer of his synagogue. Aliyah, and now it's interesting, Rabbi Bibas, I think in 1852, 1 year after his wife passed away, Rabbi Bibas made Aliyah and was welcomed by his students in Haifa. He would move to Hebron, one of the 4 cities of Israel later on, the holy cities, and would establish a seminary over there and built an extensive library. Sadly, he passed away 2 months after his arrival and was buried in the old Jewish cemetery in Hebron. Now, his legacy of Rabbi Bibas, one of the great Gibraltarian rabbis of his time, the Jewish community of Hebron used to hold a memorial ceremony for Rabbi Bibas every year on Yom Kippur evening. This tradition ended, I believe, at the time period of the 1929 Hebron massacre that forced nearly all the Jews to flee, as we've spoken about before. In 2022, the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, commemorated Rabbi Bibas on the 170th anniversary of his passing in a ceremony at the President's residence, calling him one of the first forerunners of Zionism. His tremendous historical contribution has not received sufficient recognition. I think in Israel, a street, let's say, is named in his memory. So he's like, let's just say, not appreciated as enough as he should be, let's just say, in its own right. I think in 1953, Professor Somran Zaitan spoke about Dead Sea Scrolls, which maybe had some connection within regards to him. Now let's speak about another great Gibraltarian rabbi, a name who was a chief rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese community in England, Rabbi Abraham Levy, OBE. Very interesting enough, we've spoken about him also on previous videos. He was born in 1939, in July 1939, passed away on the 25th of December in 2022. Obviously, he was a famous rabbi, a theologian, he was an author. He was chief Spanish-Portuguese rabbi of the United Kingdom. Also, if I'm not mistaken, from 1995 to 2012, I think 2012, he was a founder and member of the Naima Jewish Preparatory School, and he obtained an officer of the Order of the British Empire for services on interfaith cooperation in 2004 in of itself. So let's speak about Rabbi Abraham Levy, also obviously being the chief rabbi of the Spanish Portuguese Jewish community. He was born in Gibraltar on the 16th of July in 1939, most famously. His uncle, interesting enough, was Sir Joshua Hassan, the former chief minister of Gibraltar. We'll speak about him in the end of the video. His siblings were the former mayor of Gibraltar, Solomon Levy, Nito Korah, Luli Berish, and James Levy. Rabbi Abraham Levy is a relative also of Fleur Hassan Nahum, who was the deputy mayor of Jerusalem also. I think he moved to the United Kingdom in 1951. He would study in Carmel College, receive an ordination from the Jews College and a PhD from University of London, and become the head of the British Portuguese community in 1962, a position he would held to 2012. I think officially it would be in 1995, because I think it's listed that Rabbi Solomon Gaon had some sort of position between 1949 to 1995, according to some of the records over there. Rabbi Abraham Levy would serve as Rabbi of Bevis Mark Synagogue and Lauder Road in London. He was an honorary deputy president of London School of Jewish Studies, obviously the founder of the Naimi Jewish Preparatory School, and an ecclesiastical authority or board of deputy of British Jews. He passed away on the 25th of December 2022. He was 83 years of age, and I think he had a son. He was buried on Hoop Lane Cemetery, the Sephardi Cemetery in Golders Green. Interesting enough, King Charles would pay tribute to him, describing him as a kind and towering figure, and said he knew him as a greatly respected and admired teacher across communities. He would receive awards also. I think in 1993, Rabbi Levy was awarded a Knight Commander in the Order of Civil Merit of Spain. And I think in 2004, Rabbi Levy was appointed an OBE, an officer of the Order of the British Empire also. So that is very interesting. I think there was various different publications also within regards to him. Another famous rabbi from Gibraltar we'll speak about was a chief rabbi of his time, Rabbi who we mentioned about before, Rabbi Raphael Chaim Moses Benaim. He was another famous rabbi born in January the 15th, 1845. He passed away in July the 27th, 1920. I think we've spoken about him before. He actually passed away in Gibraltar also, obviously because he was from there. He was the father of many children, including Shmuel Benaim, Esther Halfon, Ben Sion Benaim, Masuda Benaim, Ishaya Hai Benaim, and other children also. He was, I think, the chief rabbi of Gibraltar from 1887, I believe. And he was the only son of his parents. And I think it's interesting, when he was 6 months old, his parents immigrated to Israel, to Haifa. I think later he was revealed to be great, really, in Torah, he was. And he would start learning Torah. His father took him to study in Tiberias and would send him money to live on over there. And he quickly integrated and became famous as one of the great students over there at that point in time. His parents, which is very interesting. When he was bar mitzvah, he came to Haifa. I think he did suffer from illness at that point in time. And they would add the name Moshe to his name and 2 more names, Raphael Chaim, and he recovered. I think sadly his mother passed away shortly afterwards in 1860 when he was 15 years of age. I think, so that's interesting. So he would continue learning over that point in time. I think in 1874 he was sent by the sages of Tiberias to Turkey and Greece, and would actually become a Shluchei D'Rabbanan, I believe, for the community of Tiberias, a rabbinic emissary. And 1883, I think, there was more happenings going on over there. I think he would go on various different other missions. At that point in time, he would go to Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, and would get great admiration over there at that point in time by many of the people in the communities, and was seen as a genius over there. He would arrive in Tetuan. I think he would get married, I think he was married before. I think sadly his first wife passed away, if I'm not mistaken. And he got married to a woman called Masuda Bat Hagaon Rabbi. And I think we would get an invitation from the Gibraltar community to become the rabbi at that point in time, and to become a great rabbi over there. And a yeshiva was named after him, Nachlat Moshe, I think in Jerusalem later on. I think that's based in Bayit Began also, respectively. which is managed by, I think, a grandson of his, Rabbi Yaakov, if I'm not mistaken. I think a memorial service is held every year to mark him, if I'm not mistaken. But more information, it's not all precise information I've got over here. I couldn't find much information. Now, the current head rabbi of Gibraltar is Rabbi Ron Hasid. I think he's also the senior kashrut authority over there. He's the head of the 4 synagogues also, and I think he was a chief rabbi of Gibraltar since 1985, which is already 40 years. He's very well recognized, very well respected through the Jewish community over there, working various different agencies, rabbinic agencies, schools, the kashrut, and he was ordained by the chief rabbinate of Israel. He received his rabbinic ordination from also. So that's also a very important factor. So he is the head rabbi of Gibraltar. Another senior rabbinical director in Gibraltar at the moment is a rabbi named Rabbi David Dadash. I think we actually filmed a video with a close relative of his in the series. He, I think, was a rabbinical director since its founding, since this thing. He actually studied rabbinics and Jewish law for over 15 years in some of the most famous yeshivot in Gateshead and in Israel. He would receive rabbinic ordination, I think, by the chief rabbinate of Israel in 2012, and more certificates in of itself. Has huge expertise, especially in kashrut, and works with different kashrut agencies also. He's another key rabbi over there. Another rabbi, a rabbinic coordinator currently in Gibraltar, is a rabbi named Rabbi Moshe Nachon. I think he actually studied in the United Kingdom and would serve as a community rabbi in Montreal for 20 years, where he would also work with various different major American kashrut organizations, and is key rabbi, especially in the kashrut industry in Gibraltar and in Gibraltarian Jewry, also in modern day. Another key rabbi currently in Gibraltar who is a chairman, I think, of the kashrut community, is a rabbi of the name Rabbi Mordechai Benedi. He is a 5th generation Gibraltarian, and he actually studied in the yeshiva in Paris. He also was in Manchester University, of all places, and studied rabbinics in the Gibraltar Kollel, and is director of the RSM accountancy firm. So he's a homegrown Gibraltarian, let's just say, rabbi, and chairman of the committee itself, and he oversees and authorizes all policy operations of the Gibraltar Kashrut Authority over there. Now, another famous rabbi in Gibraltar who we have to speak about is a rabbi named Rabbi Chaim Sananes. He's also another famous rabbi, I think, was a famous shochet in Gibraltar, I think in the mid-1900s, and it's chronicled over, he would actually write and speak about what was, let's say, the kashrut like in Gibraltar, especially in its time, and during that point in time, and how they would have to rely on importing meats from London and Manchester, and how there was a strong communication also with England, respectively, at that point in time. It's actually interesting. Rabbi Chaim Sanases, he himself was born rabbi in Morocco, and he also studied in famous yeshivot in Sunderland and in Gateshead, and I think he had an apprenticeship also with London Bet also, and he actually served as a shochet in Gibraltar for 30 years during his point in time, and he talked about the important positions held by Jews, let's just say, in Gibraltar respectively. He spoke very much about the chief minister, Sir Joshua Hassan, what key roles he had, and I think he was, I believe, the chief minister of Gibraltar from 1964 to 1969, and 1862 was in a capacity again, let's just say, respectively. So he was another key person. Let's speak about Sir Joshua Hassan for a minute also. He was a key person. He lived between 21st of August 1915, passed away on the 1st of July 1997. He was actually nicknamed the Salvador. He was a Gibraltar politician, the first mayor and chief minister of Gibraltar. I think he served 4 terms as a chief minister for a total of 20 years, and seen as a key figure in the civil rights movement in Gibraltar. Key role in, let's say, a creation of territories, institutions, and self-government, respectively. I think he was in office in 64 to 69. I think the monarch at that time was Elizabeth II. Also 72 to 1987 he was in office. Also, I think it was the first mayor of Gibraltar between 1955 to 1969. His full name was Joshua Abraham Hassan, and his wife's name was Danielle Salassa between 1945 to 1969, and later on got married to Marcella Ben Simon between 1969 to 1997. He was obviously born to a Sephardic Jewish family from Morocco, in Menorca. He was a trained lawyer in the Middle Temple, I believe, and was called to the Bar of England and Wales in 1939. I think when World War II broke out, he volunteered as a gunner in the Gibraltar Defence Force and remained in Gibraltar when most of the civil population had been evacuated. And I think at that point in time, as I mentioned before, only a small number of Gibraltarians will actually remain. That's what I mentioned about before. He was the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. In September 1942, there was a group of fellow Gibraltarians, clerks, workers, was led by the trade unionist Albert Risso, came together to form an association with the local inhabitants of Gibraltar. They asked who would become Sir Hassan to join them, and I think it was initially named the Gibraltarian Association, and very interesting enough. So he would actually join. He was vice president of the party under the leadership of Risso. 1948 would see Sir Hassan succeed him as a president and was leader of the AACR and the dominant figure in the politics of the territory for almost 40 years, which is interesting enough. In the election of Gibraltar Legislative Council held in 19th of December 1956, 4 of the 7 winning candidates were from the AACR, and Hassan Ibrahim Safati, Albert Risso, and J.E. Alcantara were over there respectively appointed. So that's also interesting, we have to point out. I think just go on to his personal life, he got married to Daniela Salassa. She was a Spanish national, and I think in 1969, later on, he would get married to Marcel Ben Simon. She was a Moroccan Jew, I believe. And they had 2 daughters, including Fleur Hassan Nahum, who most famously is an Israeli politician and served in the Jerusalem City Council. And as the city's deputy mayor, she's constantly on television, I think currently, especially she's been a lot on since atrocities of October the 7th. Also, she's a former politician, and she, I think, served as a member of the Gibraltarian Parliament and the founder and leader of Together Gibraltar between 2015 to 2023. Sir Joshua died, I think passed away while he was 81 years of age in a deep sleep on July 1997. And so that's interesting. Many people would eulogize him at that point in time when he passed away. And I think in 1997, a special stamp was issued by the Gibraltar Philatelic Bureau to pay tribute to Sir Hassan. So he held many different civic offices, political offices over there, which you have to point out also. Other key figures in Gibraltarian history include someone named Chaim Bentonila. I think he passed away in 1863. He was born in Tetuan in Morocco, and one of the first Jews from Tetuan to move to the city of Oran in western Algeria, then under French colonial rule. I think in Oran he established commerce company, traded in oranges, for example, from Algeria to Gibraltar and to Spain, also most famously he did over there. And at the time, I think it was a Spanish-Moroccan War in 1860, he helped 176 Jewish refugees from Tetuan in Gibraltar to move to Oran on board on one of the ships. And very interesting, I think the refugees were granted at that point in time free passports by the French authorities over there, and were followed later by other Jews from Tetuan who had settled to Oran respectively over there. And various different business opportunities were offered by the city's port and growing economy. Now, Bentolila died, I think, in the sinking of his ship in 1863. He was another famous Gibraltarian. Now, another chief rabbi of Gibraltar was rabbi of the name Rabbi Samuel Lazary. He lived between 1800 to 1890, also known as Samuel El Asri or Samuel El Asri. He, I think, very interesting. It's estimated he was born between 1800 to 1805. He was born in Tetuan. He passed away, I believe, March 30th in 1890. He was about close to about 90 years of age. We're not too sure exactly. He happened to have been the son of Solomon Levy, and he was a husband of woman of the name Clara Lassery also over there also. He was a father of various different children: Solomon Lassery, Jacob Lassery, Simi Bendelak, and Joseph Lassery also. It's very interesting. So he was a chief rabbi over there. Now another central rabbi I want to speak about over there was, we're going back now towards the start, was someone named Rabbi Isaac Nieto. He was a chacham of the Portuguese congregation Sharei Hashemayim, or Bevis Marks in London. He was also famously the son of David Nieto. He was officially appointed as a Chacham HaShalem in 1733. He would give up the post in 1741 and would then go abroad. He returned in 1747 and took up a profession of notary. In 1749, Rabbi Nieto became Rabbi. When he travelled to Gibraltar from London, he would establish a Sha'ar congregation, the oldest synagogue in Gibraltar, also known as a Great Synagogue over there. And what 1751 London congregation requested Rabbi Nieto to become a Bet Din over there, and his colleagues being Rabbi Isaac Deval, Rabbi Jacob Coronel. A few years afterwards, I think debates arose, let's just say, among the Bet Din and as relation with regards to the positions over there. And I think eventually Rabbi Nieto would send a letter of resignation on the 17th of March 1757, and that's interesting. He passed away in London in 1774, and very interesting. He famously, I think in 1756, there was a day of fast and penitence ordered by the king. A sermon moral was published in Spanish and English in London, better known in his translation, a prayer book, I think, of 2 volumes, Orden de las Oraciones de Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That was in London in 1740, and also some in 1771, which was had various different translations later on. So that's very, very interesting. So just to conclude over here, now current community life. Looked about the history with regards to it. I think the managing, there's Gibraltar's Jews currently is represented by the managing board of Gibraltar Jewish community. The organisation is structured to cater almost all aspects of Jewish life, and at the moment currently there's school systems, there's restaurants, there's a Jewish cemetery, there's a ritual bath, a mikveh, and other organisations include the Chevra Kadisha. There's a local chapter of the Women's International Zionistic Organisation, also the WISO, which is also in Gibraltar. And I think there's Jewish day schools for all ages, a Hebrew school, there's even a kollel at the moment, an institution of Talmudic studies, and its youth have a lot of work over there, the youth-oriented activities offered, let's say, through the Gibraltar area Jewish community, but no official Jewish youth organisation operated in Gibraltar area. So friends, we're going to conclude over here. At the moment, we're a community here, we're learning about great rabbis of yesterday. We explore the history of the Gibraltarian Jewish community over here on today's special edition. Please subscribe to the channel now and join the community. I'm wishing you well and blessings here from Israel. And thanks everyone for watching, and take care. Have a great day. Thank you.